Welcome everyone to Zen Peacemaker's uh, sort of short form format gathering. We call this Peacemaker Chat, and we'll be here together for 30 minutes. And if you're joining us on Facebook Live, thank you so much and welcome. And be sure this is being recorded, so after be sure to share with your friends and bounce around the internet as you will. This short form Peacemaker chat, we really don't script. We kind of go into it, just looking to see what's going to happen. So I don't want to take up any of our precious time. My good friend Lorraine Padden is our guest today, and Lorraine has a very impressive resume. She's a published writer. She was a classical ballet dancer and has worked in nonprofits, fundraising, consulting, coaching, and so forth. And she's here to share with us her work in process of haiku and other related forms called Upwelling. And we were just chatting a minute ago, and Lorraine's in process of looking for somebody to publish this work. So I hope you enjoy. And again, I'm going to mute myself here and hand to Lorraine, but sort of as a way into the topic. And I have to admit that I'm on this list of people who are less familiar with some of these forms. I'm familiar with haiku form, but Lorraine is also working in Senryu, Tonka, and Haibun forms. So I may, if I could, ask Lorraine to just give us a quick primer on what those are. So, Lorraine, please, I'll hand it over to you.
Oh, thank you, Jeff. It's an honor to be with you all. And thank you for this invitation to talk about my work. I'm a relatively new haiku writer, I think 3 years now. And the pandemic provided an opportunity for me to develop a daily writing practice. And so this is a thematic, a body of work that came out of that time. Haiku in itself dates back to the 17th century. There's a really famous poem by Matsuo Basho, one of the icons of this genre, and it's The Old Pond. A frog jumps into the sound of water. And that's just one of about 30 translations of that poem. So many of us, myself included, went to school, and at some point we were introduced to haiku as this 3-line, very short poem, usually 17 syllables, perhaps 575. And that's the way it was really imported into the West from Asia in middle of the 20th century. But it's actually can be 575 syllables. It can be less. They can be 1 line, 2, 3, 4 lines. It's this form that has much more available to it than simply trying to fit 17 English syllables into a 3-line poem. And in fact, there's scholarly debate on both sides of the genre in terms of, yes, formal haiku, 17 syllables is the way to go. There's another side here in the West that takes the stance that, well, Japanese sound units are so different from English syllables, you can't just translate them and approximate. The Japanese language uses punctuation as a sound unit in a poem, and we don't. So it's English translating in that way into a formal structure sometimes works, sometimes not. I mean, I like to write both in both styles. And as you mentioned, there are other variants and other types of related short forms. But my overall stance is both and. It's all good. And for folks that are familiar with more traditional haiku, usually they depict a moment in nature, sort of the natural world, a moment in time. They tend to be reverential and a little wistful, perhaps. And this body of work that I'm currently working on, Upwelling, is really not that at all. It incorporates some themes into haiku that are just generally Well, they're slowly gaining acceptance as appropriate content. So I'll just jump in and read a series of 4 or 5 poems here, and then we can talk about why they're controversial, perhaps, or what the context is. Out of body experience, the long drive out of Texas. Clipped wings, the hallway chatter about makeup. Lingering heat, he decides not to throw a second punch. Black-eyed Susan, the garden she left behind. White daffodils, near the pedophile's grave, daughter bulbs. RBG, the outspoken pattern of a lace collar. RBG, of course, being Ruth Bader Ginsburg. And just one more, dripping faucet, over and over and over, his opinion. So
I think I've been that guy. Perhaps even last night.
So clearly, some of these poems are placed in nature. The white daffodils, the garden. Black-eyed Susan is the name of a flower. So haiku, really, we're dealing with images. We're juxtaposing images. We're trying to maybe place them into a specific season of the year, but not always. And the set I just shared, a lot of them had absolutely nothing to do with nature. You know, out of body experience, the long drive out of Texas. There's no nature reference there. It's a very current situation. It's politically charged. It has an opinion behind it. So those elements are, I would say, a little less traditional in haiku as a genre. And the poems that really might not have a nature reference and might really talk about the world of just human affairs, or perhaps the intersection of human and the natural world, those are senryu, or can be called senryu. A lot of these definitions are quite flexible. Everything is a haiku, and senryu, I'd say, is sort of a subdivision of haiku, because it deals more with the human world than the natural world.
So that, if I could ask, if you don't mind me sort of stepping in, the distinction, just for this one, since you're talking about it, senryu, has more to do with the content and the feel of it, rather than necessarily the syllabic structure or something else like that.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely true. And senryu as well, a poem can exist completely out of any reference to nature at all. Sort of the anchoring in nature, and then those moments in nature has sort of always been the kind of a founding principle of haiku. But senryu don't really need that at all. They can dwell completely in the human world and have that same type of resonance.
I see.
Yeah, it's definitely for me also just this both end type of situation. So here's one that doesn't have I'll call it difficult content, you know, putting the word pedophile into a haiku or alluding to violence. These are not traditional topics, although they are appearing more frequently. And I was certainly called to kind of write in that vein. But one that really sits very firmly into the more traditional role of haiku is something, actually it's also senryu, but is Seventh Summer. We measure his height in sunflowers. So the image of a 7-year-old child, the sunflower being the measuring stick, summer being mentioned in the poem. So those qualities, those images juxtaposed fall into the sort of safe, widely appreciated type of haiku. And the majority of what I write in Upwelling really is a response to things happening in the world that I needed to find some way to talk about, that was not about a transcendent moment in nature. It was visceral, it's about violence, it's about it's about what we're dealing with in society today. So I'd like to move on to a different form called a haibun, which is really cool. It's haiku and prose combined, and that can be a haiku and then a paragraph or two of prose, or perhaps more, and then a haiku at the end. Haiku can be sort of interposed between the paragraphs, or in my case, one haiku can be split, each line appearing after a paragraph of
I see. I see.
and the one I would like to share now is written in that kind of woven format, but it really works best on the page because your eyes can see where the lines of the poems appear in reference to the paragraphs. Just hearing it doesn't really, it can be confusing. So I'll read the prose portion of this haibun and then the haiku at the end. Haibun generally have a title. So this one is called The Beaten Path. It's after 7 p.m. and the heat's finally dissipated enough to consider taking a jog around the Basilica of San Giovanni. In August, the air quality isn't too bad since most Romans drive their diesel out of the city for a few weeks of polluting elsewhere. So I lace up my sneakers and head out. Pausing at a light, a white electric Fiat pulls up next to me. The driver gets out and waves, saying something about a man he saw following me for the last few blocks. The walk sign is on, but I'm still on the curb trying to understand the driver's thick regional dialect. I ask where the man is now, and he points down the street behind us. The driver steps onto the sidewalk. He says I need to be careful. He offers to give me a ride home. Stations of the Cross. After each stop, a candle blown out. That's actually a true story. When I lived in Rome for a couple of years, and this actually, a lot of haiku comes from your own personal experience, and this actually, nothing bad happened, thank goodness, but it became the source for this particular story.
Yeah, as you read that at the end of the prose part, alarm bells went off in my head.
Yes.
To be sure.
Yeah.
Would you mind repeating the last the last bit?
The haiku?
Yeah, the haiku part.
Sure. Stations of the Cross. After each stop, a candle blown out.
Wow. Yeah.
And the reference to San Giovanni and circling, presumably the inside of the church, kind of helped bring that image forward.
Beautiful, beautiful. Yeah.
So another sort of sub-theme, obviously women's feminist issues, violence against women is something that is coming out in this work. Another is more sort of social and racial issues and injustice. So here are just a few that speak to that particular theme. Plantation, the path away from the shacks. The shadow side of the oak where the noose hung. The shadow side of the oak where the noose hung. And that actually is just one single line. And it's still very mysterious to me as a writer how a haiku actually takes shape, whether it's 3, 2, 3, 4, or a single line. Sometimes a single line, it has its own kind of poetic arc to it. And if you don't have line breaks between the individual lines, the thought kind of propels itself forward. Sometimes the line breaks, they're a lovely pause for the reader, because each time you pause and move to the next line, there's some time for some meaning to resonate. The amount of white space on the page between the lines can add some meaning as well. And poets add to that sense of pause by adding ellipses or a dash, or sometimes that gesture at the end of a line. But this one, the shadow side of the oak where the noose hung, seemed to work better as one single statement, one single gesture.
Thank you for kind of visual. I don't have it up on my page here, that particular one, but it's nice to be able to visualize that. And I can also see it that between oak and where could be a break, and it could be two lines too, couldn't it?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And in that, actually, if the poem were constructed that way, where the noose hung is the second line then, and it
Right.
actually has more of a to it, perhaps, in that there's something about landing on a line where the meaning is really quite evocative and quite poignant.
Is it the case, and I experience this when I hear you read yours and when I read other haiku as well, but is it really a feature of haiku that these are nuggets, that there is an energy inside of these things? They're not static. It's not a rock. It's alive. It's got an energy to it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And it's the challenge, and what makes it a really captivating form for me is that how to reveal that energy with just a few words, with just a very small. I mean, I can write paragraph long sentences, and this is the opposite of that. And I really enjoy that sort of distilling process to get to something. And I take part in lots of workshops and have studied with different poets, and people will go to the mat over whether an article needs to be in a line of one of these poems,
Yeah.
because it shifts the energy,
Yeah.
as you say.
It seems like it's the product or the result of the ultimate writing teacher's admonition. How much can you take away?
Exactly.
take
Exactly right.
take away take away some more. Okay,
Oh
take
my
away.
gosh.
Does
Yeah.
does it hurt yet? Okay, then take away some
Like a
more.
little bit more. Exactly. Exactly. Yeah. I often fill up a page of just random thoughts and phrases and words. And from that huge mass, sometimes something kind of distills that works. So just a couple of more in this particular vein of this type of injustice. Exposed bedrock. The all-white jury acquits. Exposed bedrock. The all-white jury acquits. And that is 3 lines, so acquits has its own presence on an individual line. And this poem won an award from the North Carolina Poetry Society that does an annual series of contests. And I was really honored that it was selected.
Very powerful. Uh,
Um,
yeah, I like that quite a lot.
um, and one more in this vein. 10 o'clock curfew, ending the protest, hunger moon, which you could also read as 10 o'clock curfew, ending the protest, hunger moon. So again, we have a mix of hunger moon, which is an actual phenomenon in the fall, and a protest, a unique human activity, and exposed bedrock. Bedrock is a thing, right? But to relate it to something else, an underlying sense. So both of those, I guess, could be haiku or senryu, depending on who you talk to. But they're definitely in that same that same flavor.
I see that. Yeah, wonderful, wonderful. Thank you.
Got a couple of other themes that emerge in this collection. If I'll share just a smattering of things
Yeah,
from
please, please.
these are about war. And violence is clearly the through line here. Okay. Chimneys, long shadows over Dachau. Chimneys, long shadows over Dachau. And this next one is a 5-line poem, which is a tanka. Sometimes a 3-line haiku, sometimes there's the poem needs a little more space to actually convey the meaning that the writer wants to offer. So 5-line tanka, again, it stems from a very formal syllabic structure of length of each individual line that's loosened up quite a bit. And this is not conform to any particular formal structure, but it's needed a little more room, I think, to express itself. At war with his blanket, my father relives his nights in the trenches. At war, it's the first line, with his blanket, my father relives his nights in the trenches. So in this one, each, just 2 or maybe 3 words on a line give each little phrase or fragment there a little more chance to resonate with meaning.
Yeah, I see that. It's so powerful in its brevity, and I like the 5 line. That feels like it feels expansive. It feels like there's some space in there, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a little more room to let it sit, and it takes us longer to read through the poem, so a little bit longer for things to land. Yeah.
But in terms of syllable count, it's no more than the traditional 575. I mean, I wasn't counting there, but it's got to be pretty close.
Yeah, I think it's a little more, maybe around 20, 21.
Oh, is it okay?
But yeah, but you're right. It kind of hones in on that formal structure, yet by making it 5 lines and by, making it visually appear a little bit different on the page. Exactly. It gives it a little more room and gives the reader a chance to invest a little more into it.
Yeah.
Here's a couple, I've been writing a lot about the war in Ukraine, and in the haiku world and the world in general of written expressive arts, artists are showing up with work that reflects this situation, this incredible conflict. So here are just 2 that directly came out of the war in Ukraine as a topic. Wolf Moon, papering the windows for the Ave Maria. Wolf Moon, papering the windows for the Ave Maria. Air raid shelter, the quieter callings of stray cats and doves. Air raid shelter, the quieter callings of stray cats and doves. The first, Wolf Moon, it wasn't a leap for me to think that those are the Russians, the Wolf Moon, and papering the windows of a church so that the service could still continue. And the air raid shelter.
Safely.
Safely, exactly.
Yeah.
In that moment, who knows, right? But perhaps. In the air raid shelter, I wanted to juxtapose the sound of what draws you to the air raid shelter with other voices and sounds that are in that, possibly in that milieu as well, stray cats, doves, or the sounds of normal, and the sounds of normality, right? Juxtaposed against this air raid shelter, that incredible siren. So here's another Haibun. Again, I chose the woven technique. So a little bit of prose, first line of the haiku, a little bit of prose, the next, and so on. This one's short enough. I think I will just read the prose as 1 paragraph and then the haiku at the end. It's called Vanishing Point. My husband asks if I happen to know why the distance between the World Trade Center Twin Towers was slightly greater at the top than at the bottom of the 2 buildings. He says, you can't see it, but the towers were actually designed that way. I flash back to a memory of standing in Tobin Plaza, craning my neck to follow the lines of the towers as far as I could. Then it hits me, the curvature of the earth. From the couch to the floor, they close their eyes and jump. From the couch to the floor, they close their eyes and jump.
When I read this, I just absolutely fell in love with it.
Thank you. I was very moved, and I still am, about some of the folks that leapt off the towers.
Yeah.
So that's where that arose from. Not another horrific war, violent situation of conflict. So.
Yeah. 。 . 。 。 。 。 . 。 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。 . 。
Um, moving on to climate change, environmental degradation. It's interesting. Trash Panda is a wonderful haiku journal run by a friend and fellow poet of mine. And she really focuses her journal on climate change and environmental degradation, which is really important. And again, it's like a symbol that the haiku world is kind of opening up to topics and content that does not fit the typical moon, cherry blossoms, these motifs that are wonderful and so traditional and so time honored. And I think the genre is shifting to include some other things as well. And I think it's a really interesting development. In fact, a couple of poet friends, actually, they've started a contest for poets to come up with new sort of new kigo. The kigo is a seasoned word, it's a reference that poets often insert into poems, and it pays homage to where the tradition comes from, and it also anchors and defines a haiku by having this seasonal reference. And there are volumes in this whole kind of encyclopedia of season words that have been accepted over centuries, basically. And so I participated in a contest to contribute a new kigo. And one of the ones I submitted was accepted, and I came up with vanishing white. White is a kigo word. It can be morning. It has several different seasonal meanings. But vanishing white was mine, and the poem is Vanishing White. A polar bear dissolves in the distance. Vanishing white, a polar bear dissolves in the distance.
I love that. I love that.
One more. Clear cut. A woodpecker forages sideways.
Say, read again.
Clear cut. A woodpecker forages sideways.
Sideways. Ah,
So that the tree has fallen. And so now that woodpecker, perhaps the orientation is different.
right. Beautiful, beautiful. Well, we're coming up on a couple of minutes left, so as the host, I have sort of pocket privilege to ask you to read and briefly talk about one that really caught my eye, and I'm sure it's out of sequence with your themes, but Throttle I found quite interesting.
Oh, I don't have that one in front of me. And actually, I will decline to read that because it's not yet published.
Oh, okay, okay.
So I'd rather send it to a journal first. I was going to read it though, because I like that as very much as well. And that actually, just a teaser, if you will. It was inspired. I was driving and I came up behind a Ford Bronco that was literally shaking in its lane, and the person behind the wheel was gesturing very aggressively toward whomever was in the passenger seat. And I pulled off the road, and I passed, and I could see into the window, and it was an adult ready to essentially throttle a child. So I was horrified.
Yeah.
And yeah. So anyway, that's the germ of that particular.
Well, maybe another time when it's
Another
published, you can
time.
read it to us. And but I see now, as you've described, there's a couple of lines of prose, and
Yes.
then the first line of the haiku, a line of prose, the second line of the haiku,
Right.
a line of prose, and then the third. And you can read the haiku as a standalone.
Exactly. Yeah. And some poets decide to put 3-line haiku or a 1-line haiku, what have you, at the top, then the prose, and then a couple more, or just juxtapose them with paragraphs, or put them all at the end. I mean, it's a wonderful freedom to decide how is this going to resonate in the best way.
Wonderful, wonderful, wonderful. Well, we did quite well as far
Yay.
as sticking to our time. I'd like you to promise us to let us know when you do publish,
Oh, I will. Thank you so much. I'd be absolutely delighted to. Thank you.
and we'll put a notice. We'll put a notice in our newsletter, and 7 or 8 thousand people will know about your book.
That's great. Thank you.
So
Thank you. If I could close, I'll offer just one more. And
please do. Yes.
it
Yes.
speaks not only to nature, but also to the process of actually writing haiku. High tide. a pile of words outside the poem.
Very nice. I love that. I love that. Wow, what an image. Beautiful. Okay, well, everyone who is out in Facebook land, thank you so much for spending your half an hour this morning with
Yes,
us,
thank you
or
so
afternoon, or evening, wherever you are in the world. And my good friend Lorraine, thank you so much for sharing your beautiful work with us, and some in process, and we love that. So, thank you, everybody,
Such
and
an
we'll hope to
honor.
see you the next time.